Welcome to our Community Our Health. This is our National Drug Early Warning System, which is our early detection program. And today we are going to talk about early detection of new psychoactive substances through online monitoring. We have a duo here, a wonderful pair. Panel includes Dr. Elan Barenholtz and Daniel Zant. They're both at Florida Atlantic University, and you'll hear all about the work that they're doing. They will introduce themselves. But I just wanted to say thank you for joining us. We are recording this, and we're going to talk about how online monitoring is transforming the early detection of new psychoactive substances. First, I want to know what your perspective is on online monitoring. So we'd like you to answer this brief pretest. So go ahead and fill out this perspective here, but give us your perceptions about it. And we will go ahead and now talk about this. This webinar is brought to you by NDEWS. And throughout this program today, you'll hear about the National Drug Early Warning System. And I just want to put out an advertisement for our weekly briefing, which comes out every Friday at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. And you will learn a lot of different things, and you might even be able to help us by sharing with us things that you might have access to, papers you might be able to share with us that are published, other information that you might have about some of the questions that we ask on a weekly basis of our readers. So now that we've done the pre-test, let's just jump right in. And I'm going to moderate this session, but knowing these two people, I don't think that they're going to need a moderator. So we'll start right now by just having you introduce yourself. We'll start with you, Elan. You are on mute.
Can't believe after all these years, I can't get it. I'm the AI guy. So I am Elan Barenholtz. I am the co-director of the Machine Perception and Cognitive Robotics Lab at Florida Atlantic University. And I work on artificial intelligence models, vision models, and language models. And I also apply them. And that's what actually brought me to some extent to NDEWS. I lead up the web monitoring team, and there's all kinds of data out there now, more of it every day. And we are trying to figure out how to access and utilize that data. And so that's we've been primarily focused on Reddit as our primary data stream. You're going to hear quite a bit about that. But we are developing constantly, keeping our ear to the ground, trying to understand what the landscape of data looks like and how we can make it useful.
Thank you. And go ahead and introduce yourself, Daniel.
All right. Howdy, y'all. My name is Daniel Van Zant. I am a T32 trainee and proud to be one with the National Institute of Drug Abuse and NDEWS, obviously. And then I am also proud to be Elan's PhD student, or I guess technically PhD candidate now. And I'm sort of the boots on the ground with machine learning and web monitoring, this kind of work for the past few years. So I think Elan's going to, in general, talk about things a little bit higher level, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the nitty gritty of it, but we'll be bouncing back and forth a little bit.
Okay, so we are recording this. It will be archived on our website, which is ndews.org. So Elan, let's start by having you explain what online monitoring is, why it's a useful tool for understanding substance use trends.
Absolutely. So, as it sounds, it's essentially there's this fire hose of data that's coming out of we can think of as typically historically these types of data sets didn't exist, but now they do. People talk, and they talk a lot online, and they talk about just about everything, and that includes novel psychoactive substances. And there is a gold mine of conversation, as we've learned, in the course of doing this that is coming from these non-traditional sources, data sources. And the thing we've discovered about them is that they contain lots of conversation around substances we might be interested in, but more importantly, that this is useful information. It's not just, oh, look, there's a substance here. People are talking about it. Maybe we should know about it. It's that we actually have been able to see that we can predict from the kind of conversations that people are having in these informal kind of environments. These substances will actually show up on the streets. They'll show up in toxicity reports. And so we actually see that there's very strong predictive potential from the kind of data that's coming through these, as I said, these non-conventional sources. And so it's a canary in the coal mine. Is one simple answer to the question of why we should be doing this, what the purpose is we're the National Emergency Warning System. We're an early warning system, and we are. I will take the claim that our team is the earliest. And we've actually done this a couple of times where we've detected a substance because the substance is nobody's looking for it yet. Nobody on the monitoring side is really looking for it because they don't even know it exists. We are finding about from typically it's like a psychonaut community. People are like the canary likes to sing, I guess you could say. And so there's all of this chatter. Sometimes it's just chemical names. Sometimes it has a street name. But we will actually find these things before they've really emerged into much more widespread use. So we really are able to catch things early. And Daniel will certainly be able to talk about some specific examples of cases where we've detected before anybody else. And we can also see, because of the nature of these conversations, is something I'd like to talk about maybe a little bit later. We can analyze not just, hey, there's a substance, here's its characteristics, but we can find out what people are saying about it. And that means we can detect not only is it people have positive or negative feelings towards it, which will make it more likely that it might become a widespread phenomenon, but we can see if there are health risks, particular health risks. So people will report, their actual health incidents, and they'll just do this out there on Reddit. And so if we're able to detect that there are significant health risks from this kind of data long before people are showing up in emergency rooms with multiple substances in their system, and you're like, okay, this had cardiac arrest, but was it substance A or substance B, and the panel doesn't even necessarily have our substance yet, right? So we are getting data about not only emergent substances that may become widespread, but also about their potential health risks long before any of this can show up in conventional channels. So that's really, I'd say, the primary answer to the question of why we are doing this. What's the point of web monitoring? It's getting the head start, being able to detect things before the traditional channels will be able to find it.
And I'm going to jump in here, and you talked about how this is an early signal, Elan. One of the biggest reasons why this is an early signal is because we're literally monitoring the people who are creating new substances in many cases. And so, and if they're not the ones who created it, they're certainly the first ones trying it. But oftentimes there's many people on these online communities who seems like have have very low risk aversion and have a PhD level of knowledge in biochemistry and these kinds of things, and are willing to experiment on themselves and their close friends, and they will just share this online. And so a lot of times we can have high confidence that we're the first person to detect something because we see literally the first mention of a thing online ever. Anywhere. Yeah, because they're like, hey, I just tried making this in my garage or my basement. And me and my friends tried it, and here's what happened, and they'll give sort of a full report on it. A lot of times there's a lag between those very early initial reports of the people who are doing it homemade until somebody figures out how to sort of scale up manufacturing. But yeah, we're very often seeing the first reports of this anywhere ever because we're literally seeing write-ups from the people who are experimenting and creating these new substances.
Exactly. And I should mention when I started this work with this group, and this was before your time, Daniel, but it was dark web, and we were trying to scrape dark web, which came with a lot of challenges. The dark web does not like to be scraped. Doesn't want you to know it doesn't want algorithms to find out what's going on. And it really turns out, that was not where the signal was, because by the time it's out there and it's sort of a brand name, and it's being widely distributed, that's where it's probably already fairly coincident with the other channels that are finding it. But Reddit, for a long time, we were able to gather data very easily there. And it's actually not only easier to gather, but as I said, it's better data, it's earlier data, because as Daniel's pointing out, the guy who invents the thing in the garage, then it gets, it's what's the cycle? We don't really know, we fully understand the cycle, but it's probably percolates over months or even years before that ends up really hitting. Although again, we've detected things, I'd say months before, maybe 6 months before. And so it's really it's a different it's a completely different trajectory of how these signals are happening. And so we're seeing things from their sort of from their birth. Anyway,
So Daniel,
go ahead.
what does it look like? What do you mean you're doing this web monitoring? Can you show us what an example of what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So we use the actual Reddit API, which is a little bit of a headache to get access to and use, but it's a headache that's very worthwhile because there's this incredible treasure trove of data. But I can just show Reddit directly real quick. So in my opinion, anyone in substance use public health should be searching Reddit. So here's what the communities we monitor look like. We can see this is one of the main communities. Research chemicals is kind of a tongue-in-cheek name. Um, and we can see, there's all sorts of different posts on here. Here's someone talking about these two substances being sold on the ClearNut. Uh, that could be very interesting to someone. Here is a trip report. Trip reports like these are very common, and they're where we get some of our best data. It's someone that's going like hour by hour through them ingesting the substance and what happens, and even talking, all right, a few days after I felt these health effects and all sorts of things like that. So, again, it's this kind of data on humans is often not available anywhere else for substances that are very novel. Um,
So what's
Here's
a
someone asking it,
ClearNet? Explain what ClearNet means.
not the dark web. So this person is saying, and I would believe it, that they can go somewhere just that you can search from Google and buy these two things. In fact, I bet if I would punch these two things into Google right now, I would find someone who I could buy them from and ship them to me. Just, with a regular credit card or whatever. So no crypto, no dark web, none of that. It's just like buying something from Amazon. Um, and so something that I think everyone should be doing is there is this trick that I use very frequently on Google where I'm going to make everything bigger. Uh, you can make the start of your Google search site and then you punch in a site. Now, I'm going to say, I think if anyone's interested in a new substance, they should start with site NDEWS.org, and then see if we've ever done a report on something. I believe I'm spelling this right. Here's one that we reported on recently. A lot of times that'll be a nice little summarized form of information for it. But as far as Reddit goes, you can search site reddit.com and then search the name of the substance, whatever it is. And you're going to have this whole treasure trove of people talking about it, sort of directly from lived experience. Or again, these websites have huge amounts of people who have the equivalent of a PhD in biochemistry, and they'll talk about it in a very, very educated way. They'll be like, "All right, this thing's the analog of this substance, and you switch these two things at these two sites on the chemical structure." And so I think anyone in public health, anytime they're looking at any substance, should do this sort of thing. Cite reddit.com, pip tapentadol, or whatever the substance name is. Uh, there's a few subreddits that are very popular, so you can search those directly. Especially if something's been getting in the news, sometimes the noise can drown out the signal outside of these subreddits because you'll just see people talking about the news articles instead of folks posting lived experience. So, for instance, we've got this one, research chemicals, and I can search this, same example. Um, and then I'm going to show the other really popular one, aside from research chemicals, is r/drugs. And then often, if you search just Reddit, you will find specialized communities dedicated to a particular substance. So I bet if I throw in 7OH here, here you go. I found a community dedicated specifically to 7OH. And so uh, 8,000 people every week post on this community in some form as a post or a comment. So if you're interested in 7OH, which has popped up recently, and by the way, is one of the things that the web monitoring team was talking about and alerting to way before almost anyone else. But if you're interested in this, you have 8,000 lived experience accounts that are accessible right here. People post pictures of it, people post chemical information, people post health effects, and I'm a little bit reticent to click on any of these because Elan and I both know people are very honest. I mean, people will say, sort of, I got violent diarrhea, and here's what the violent diarrhea looked like. So the bottom line is, it's really is a treasure trove of rich data directly from lived experience, and directly not only from lived experience, but folks with lived experience who have very high levels of knowledge of the biochemistry as well. So it's really wonderful. And so, uh, yeah, so for anyone, for any substance in public health, I would absolutely be punching in citereddit.com or citereddit.com and then /r, one of these communities, and then searching whatever substance. And I know you don't have to be technical to do that. You can read these directly. It's just a form of social media. And I know at least Herb, who's on the call, told me that he does do this and he gets some really great results with it when he's investigating something.
Can I ask a question also, Daniel? Can you ask Reddit to tell you any information on the location?
This is a
The
very good
country,
question.
the state, anything.
So this is the largest limitation of the Reddit data, is that there is pretty much zero information on any of this kind of stuff. Uh, yeah, there's no
Unless people
information on
share it,
location.
unless it happens to show up in their
Yeah.
comments. But that's not that very atypical. People don't tell you anything about their local. Everything's, shipped now. And so it's not like I've got my local 7OH dealer here in New Delhi or something. It's just not how it is. They don't talk about that stuff.
So there's no /US or no /Arizona or anything like that.
No,
Okay.
No, not really.
I've long wondered, and it's something we haven't ever tried to do. To what extent we are stymied by the fact that we're only looking for Reddit subreddits with English language that are using this term. Maybe there are other, maybe they're what's 7OH called, in Spanish, and maybe there are, similar kinds of subreddits in other languages. And I would certainly invite people, if anybody on this call is international and works in a different language, or knows, or rather, lives in an area or has expertise in a region that uses a different language. I think that's an interesting question that we, personally have not pursued. In that Reddit tends to be very heavily English oriented, but I don't actually know the stats. Like I don't, I'm sure there are many subreddits that are non-English. So it's an interesting observation about the way the way we have to go about it is just typically searching for terms. But I should mention very briefly that there are other ways to go about besides what that we use, that as the web monitoring the web monitoring team is deploying other ways of looking at these rather than just doing this kind of targeted search. So you can actually try to algorithmically detect novel substances as they emerge, and that's not as dependent on knowing the name beforehand or anything like that.
Yes. So we're doing some fancier things, but this just regular search is a tremendous resource, and you don't have to be
Simple
technical
as
to
that.
do it. Yeah. I'm also going to show a couple of other websites that are sort of things are discussed online. With these websites, you have to be very careful citing them in any research because they can make the lives of researchers hard, and Reddit as well. They have terms for citing them in research, but you can still look on these for various forms of information. Arrowhead is one of them, and then Blue Light is another one. And so I believe it's bluelight.org. Yeah, and so Blue Light is another forum, uh, and we don't usually post about these. We don't usually sort of link to these or post about them publicly or scrape them because they're very against that kind of thing. But they are there as an informational resource that's kind of created by the community, similar to Reddit. And if you are just purely interested in getting information and using it in your own public health practice, whatever that is, I would highly recommend looking at these as well.
So you talked a little bit about how you can do this if you know the name, but then what you bring to our team is periodically you'll say something popped up. And so that will tell us maybe we should then ask our Sentinel site directors about it, and it causes a whole cascade of other opportunities for us to learn how to. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how these things pop up and then how you present this information in our briefing.
Yeah, absolutely. So pop up can mean a few different things. It can mean our sort of algorithm emerged it, which is a little bit more inaccessible for people who aren't as technical. But pop up can also be on any of these subreddits. You can search by top and you can search by week, month, year. And, if you search this way, you're going to get highly, highly discussed and highly, highly upvoted posts. Here's one on biphenyl methamphetamine. This is one of the most highly upvoted posts in the past year. You can see it has 86 comments. So that's 86 folks with lived experience talking about this thing. And when something has a very large number of upvotes, we usually pay attention to that as well. One other thing, if someone is really interested in Reddit, I would really recommend them doing this. Uh, is I have I kind of joke that I have one of the sketchiest Reddit accounts out there because I exclusively follow all of these different subreddits and I upvote things that are novel. And this tells the Reddit algorithm that this is the kind of thing I'm interested in. And because of that, it's got like a feed and a home page just filled with novel substances. Um, and so I think I follow like 80 something subreddits with this account. I made a special account just for this so that, my regular Reddit feed isn't filled up with all of this. Uh, but this is a good way to get information on things as well. And, you can just go through it once a day. If something is high signal to you as a public health researcher, upvote it and tell the algorithm you want more of that. And I would say within maybe a week or two of doing that and following a bunch of these subreddits, uh, you're going to get some pretty high signal recommendations just directly from the Reddit algorithm. So, I mean, like download the app on your phone, follow all of these, upvote things that you find interesting, and the Reddit algorithm itself will sort of bring you more interesting things once it knows that that's what you're interested in. And so, but yeah, that's the three things. We have the internal thing that's harder to replicate for most folks, but then you can also search what's been at the top of these communities. So like I showed the 7OH community, if you're interested in what's going on in 7OH, that's really big. You could sort those by top and then get a Reddit account and follow a bunch of this stuff and upvote things that you find interesting. That's the three things.
There is a chat saying, are you implying if you cite them, they could disappear? And then asking about clarification why you need to be careful to cite.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. Just go ahead and
yeah. No, go ahead, Elan. I think
I was going to say, yeah. I mean, over the history of web monitoring, we have actually experienced people don't necessarily like to be surveilled, right? It's not surprising, and some of these communities, particularly in the subreddit communities, we do. I guess we actually do not ever, except in published papers, announce that we're sniffing around. It's not like we're not getting access in any way that is underhanded. We're just Redditors like anybody else. But at the same time, we do try to not push too hard on the big announcement that we are actually gathering this data. We have actually had community members reach out and say, hey, we want to work with you, and then by the time you're done with the conversation, you realize it's not tenable, and then the concern is that they're gonna say, hey, everybody, let's just go over to some other subreddit where nobody is aware we're here. So they're very, very open, have very open conversations in the public sphere, but we do like to keep a pretty low footprint as far as mentioning and making it clear that we're actually gathering this data. I think personally, this has been an internal conversation for a long time. I'm convinced that almost all psychonauts would very strongly support what we do as a group because we are just absolutely health concerned. We are trying to get the word out to these communities in general that if they're health concerns. I think the psychonaut community it tends to be sort of in some way altruistic, and they're trying to warn each other about potential health risks. But at the same time, we do see some potential risk in announcing ourselves too much, including citing. And then when it comes to these websites like Blue Light, and there is some hesitation. They don't necessarily want to be scraped, so to speak. They don't necessarily want researchers snooping around, and so we do have to be somewhat careful. And we certainly reveal any publication. We're going to mention our data sources, but we don't typically announce ourselves in terms of making a big deal of the fact of where we are getting this data.
And I will say, in general, we try to keep things at a pretty high level of where we got the data from, and that seems to mostly keep the communities pretty happy. So for the most part, we just say we have the data from Reddit, and we have the full list of all the subreddits we monitor, and we're willing to share that with anyone who shoots us an email. But for the most part, we say we just got the data from Reddit vaguely. And then the most specific we'll get is sometimes we might refer to a specific subreddit, but only if the specific subreddit is very large. So, saying we got the data from somewhere in this community of 50,000 people is still not very specific. We would never cite a specific post. We would never cite a specific user, obviously, for anonymity reasons.
Yeah, the most we will say, users mention, right? If there's several mentions of, say addiction or something like that, we will mention that in our reports, but we're not going to give the entire context of somebody go and find that person.
Yeah, exactly. We'll never do direct quotes. We'll never mention anything that's only been mentioned by one person. So there's best practices here, just like there is when you're working with any community with lived experience. And we do our best to follow those. And mostly these communities have been reticent to work with us, but we have gotten a few notices from folks in these communities of like, hey, you guys should take a look at this. And so that's part of the reason why we like to stay on their good side. And so,
Okay, and what about the papers that you have written, and what have you found?
Well, we could talk about, so some of the papers are sort of these meta papers in the sense that I guess our biggest finding, frankly, was that the data is there and that it's predictive. And so we did a pretty long sort of longitudinal analysis of substances and their earliest occurrences on the subreddits, and then their emergence in toxicology reports. And you can see a pretty clear kind of predictive for those substances that had reached a certain threshold. A high proportion of them actually ended up showing up in what I guess you could call wider usage based on toxicology reports. So that was the basic strong piece of evidence that there really is this kind of predictive signal. What we've been doing since then, and some of the more recent work, and Daniel could speak more to this, is actually incidents where we've been able to use this kind of data to analyze a very specific substance and understand what's happening with it, whether it's likely to become a broader trend, what are users' experiences with it. So we've gotten more, now we've got the tool. It's a matter of applying it. So we've applied it across numerous different substances and used it uh, as a valuable data source. Again, early, right before there's really much known in the broader community, but been able to both gather that data and then now ideally to disseminate it.
And I can speak to one study that's sort of in this vein that we've got coming out very soon. And then I think Elan has some exciting things to say about what this means for research on these kinds of data more widely. But one of these things we mentioned, 7-hydroxymetragenine was something we alerted to well before anyone else. We've got a study in the works that has essentially scraped an enormous amount of data from Reddit. An amount of data that would be sort of, I think probably a six-figure grant if you were going to have human research assistants process all of it, or something close to that range. Uh, and what we've been able to do is do a thematic analysis where we're like, all right, what's the physical symptoms? What's the psychological symptoms? Are there mentions of clinical signs of addiction? Are there mentions of clinical signs of tolerance being gained? All of these sorts of questions that public health experts might be interested in. And then what we can do with that is we can have human raters and a large language model look at a small subgroup of the post. So I think like 200, we had them all look at. We can see what there is good inter-rater reliability with. So essentially, where does the AI score things roughly the same as a human would? Where can we be relatively confident of that? And then this is something that's really exciting for anyone that's working with textual data, especially anyone that's working with large amount of textual data, is once we're confident that the AI is scoring things the same way as the human, we can run it on this giant, giant, giant data set. I think it probably took a total of $24 in API costs or something to have it run something like almost 1,700 posts, I want to say. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. But I mean, 1,700 sort of multi-paragraph posts, something that would have been an enormous, enormous undertaking with human research assistants. Once we're confident that the AI is scoring things well, we can just run it through that. And now we have all of these amazing statistics on 7OH and how folks are talking about it, and what percentage of folks are mentioning tolerance gain, and what percentage of folks are mentioning this psychological symptom or this physical symptom, and these kinds of things. And so that's an example of the kind of investigations into these unique things. And I think Lon can actually talk about sort of what he's excited about for the future of this research generally based on this new sort of papers we're working on publishing.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the problem used to be where do you get your data, and it was hard to get. Obviously, this kind of data just wasn't available before. People, I guess, how would you have even tried to gather, the natural sort of conversational discussions around novel psychoactive substances? That maybe there were conferences or things like that, but there was nothing quite like the fount of data that currently exists. So the first problem is getting the data, and then the second problem is, of course, figuring out what's in the data. So the gathering of the data, in some ways, we had actually I think a very effective system to detect novel substances. It became a little bit more challenging as Reddit actually changed their terms of services in terms of how widespread a net we could sort of cast. But there are now new tools, basically in the form of the AI large language models, that really now could serve two purposes that we haven't really had the opportunity to fully leverage yet. This is something that we're actively working on. And so there's two ways to think about what you can do with artificial intelligence in the context of this kind of social media monitoring. And one is to actually use it as the detector system. So the way we've historically done it is kind of more conventional natural language processing techniques, as opposed to just, hey, we have a tip about a certain substance, let's go see if it's out there. But how do you sort through, how do you comb over large clusters of data and try to figure out whether something is a novel psychoactive substance? So we can leverage the language models now in a way that they simply didn't exist before. And what we can do with them now is have them churn through data. So the 7OH is just a paradigmatic example. This was a case where we already had gotten sort of a human tip. This 7OH didn't pop up, so to speak, based on our algorithm. But once we knew about it, there was actually an enormous amount of data. There was certainly a healthy amount of conversation happening around the substance. And then you get to the second sort of potential application of this technology. One is to churn through data to detect something, and the other was to churn through data to understand it. And the beautiful thing is it's all the same underlying technology. It's all the language models, but you have to know how to use them. Where was I? So I was talking about the dual purpose. And so one is to be able to detect, and the other one is to go through data that you've already gathered. Not, regardless of how you've determined that you're going to make this a target of data gathering, and do the kind of gumshoe stuff that would have taken, as Daniel pointed out, many hours of human labor. And we've got an upcoming paper that shows the degree of reliability or validity is of the language models in analyzing just unstructured human text, basically conversations on Reddit, and being able to detect whether, for example, people report a certain side effect, whether people report positive or negative valence on their experiences, and more nitty-gritty kind of experiences. All of this, the AI is very good at doing, arguably better than humans in the sense that if you work with human research assistants, there's a certain degree of variability in their performance, and if you're relying on them, especially when you're trying to see if there's actual inter-rater reliability, if you have a subject who's not so great, you're kind of screwed. The AI is consistent. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's very consistent. It doesn't, come in after a long night of drinking and not being able to and trying to do its work. It does it very consistently, and what we're finding is it's pretty darn good. And so, in terms of speed with which you and scope, right? Because one way to think about this is you can ask completely new questions. You have new questions, follow-up questions from your data. Back in the day, you gave your RAs, your team of 5 of them to churn through the thing. And then you're like, wait, I have another one, or I have another 5 follow-ups. That's, basically the semester's over, right? So we're talking about the ability to do things at a much faster pace. And that gives you much more flexibility to ask different kinds of questions. And that's where it really starts to get interesting is both on the alerting side and also on the analysis side, is we can think very creatively now, not about the questions we're going to ask, but actually the LLMs, the AI to some extent may generate questions in response to what it's reading. So it might understand that there's a certain kind of hint of a certain kind of trend, and it may say, I think we should pursue this, and it can come back to us with that idea. So it's a far broader kind of tool than something that sort of does historical. They're just a better, faster tool for doing, standard, even coding tasks like we've historically done. Put these into these various categories. But the thing I'm excited about is pursuing this beyond that, because what we're really looking for is prediction. Is this thing going to persist? Is it going to spread? Are the negative impacts going to, down the line, start impacting people in a very significant way? We can think about how we want to ask those questions by saying, here's the following survey questions we want to take from this data, right? Here's some predetermined questions that we want to ask as researchers, but there is much more that's in this data, that's latent in this data, that is predictive. And that's, again, this is not published. This is based on my experience within other domains of using this kind of modeling. There's latent predictive data, latent predictive information that's in these conversations that we're not even going to get from just doing this kind of coding. So that's what I think is the frontier. I think that's where things are going, and it's going to be, but it's going to be a team effort in the sense like you guys, in this room and in this panel and the larger community has to be asking sort of the right questions to the AI. If we, let's say, or as our team is maybe able to deploy it at scale to very large troves of data, but as far as the questions we need to be asking of that data, that's where it's really going to be a partnership. It's not like the AI doesn't know what are the right questions to ask. It's folks who are out in there in the field who are actually wondering, is this substance something I need to be concerned about? That's the kind of thing you're gonna be able to take back. I mean, our data will have latent information about those questions.
And I'm going to chime in here real quick and say we've got all these exciting methods of analysis. And Elan briefly mentioned sort of other sources he looks at. This sort of LLM methods is useful for any large sources of textual data. So we're running a study right now looking at the information on ketamine clinic websites and how they describe themselves. And you can do the same thing where you can just process an incredibly, incredibly large amount of textual information with the exact same methods as if you had, a giant six-figure funded team of undergraduate research assistants working for you. So I said anybody who's in public health should be at least taking a peek at Reddit. Anyone who's working with mass amounts of textual data should really be looking into these large language model methods. And I think we would certainly be happy to help anyone get up and running with these things and talk with them more about it.
Yeah, I find myself evangelizing about them a little bit. I feel like I'm a broken record sometimes about it. But if your research involves any sort of data that consists of natural language or any sequential data, then you probably should be considering employing these things in your research.
Can you talk about how we harmonize data with different sources so that your source and maybe the EMS records and you know, some of the ways that we harmonize?
So that's just a communal effort amongst the NDEWS, the members of NDEWS, and we're constantly doing triangulation and trying to understand how our different channels relate to one another. We are because we're early. The harmonization is kind of like that's the end product. If if we successfully detect something, then it should show up eventually in wastewater. It should show up in the toxicology reports. It should show up in these various locations. And that harmonization in some ways is sort of the proof of concept for us. So we have seen this, as you said, quite a number of times. And it's frankly, it's those weekly meetings, those weekly conversations we have as a team where this, Daniel presents the weekly briefing from our team. And I see it happening over and over again. And of course, everybody in this room probably knows about the briefing, but it's very widely subscribed to. And by the time people are seeing it in the briefing, guess what? It's just as soon as the rest of our team finds out about it because it's fresh. And this is our analysis is being presented a few days before to our team. And so the team has, somebody will jump in and say, okay, we're seeing this. So often we'll have outside members of the community who will be seeing similar things. So the harmonization happens through collaboration like this, these kinds of conversations.
And I will say, just because I think you actually answered one of the questions in the chat, someone asked if we validate health risks. For example, if something is mentioned on Reddit, do we validate that chemical would really have that risk? And this triangulation within the team is exactly how we validate things like that. We have toxicologists on the team. We have people monitoring wastewater on the team. We have people interviewing people literally on the street on the team. And whenever we see something, we bring it to all of those people and say, hey, has anyone else heard anything? We have people who are experts in the chemical structure, and we say, okay, well, is this feasible that this would have this effect based on this chemical structure? And so Elan and I are both tremendously thankful for the incredible team we have at NDEWS. I think we're both learning people first that ended up getting into this work because we really care about the substance use epidemic in the United States. Uh, and we're very thankful that we've got other people on the team who have much more expertise on sort of the substance use side of things that we can triangulate with. So yes, we do validate health risks, definitely.
Yeah, and just, there's even so we collect data, EMR data for biospatials. This basically these are, very on the ground when people they need emergency contact from police or from other emergency health workers, and this gets logged, and we are getting the data of actual people being, harmed by substances. That data, it has to, it's, by the time it's being reported, obviously, by, first responders, that's several cycles out from where we are sitting. But we do see this entire projection, this kind of trajectory of substances emerging and then actually showing up, and unfortunately causing harm. So that's sort of the full cycle of harmonization. And then there's everything in between, as we said, because we have this team of people of incredible, the best in the business, frankly, who
Mhm.
are working on these different modalities. And so in some ways, the data is not going to lie in the end, right? If the substance is real and it's not just in some person's garage, and it's actually emerging, it's going to start to show up in these other channels, and so that's how it's actually what we'd call a trend, as opposed to just a fad or something like that, that's bubbles up quickly and then disappears.
And I will say because I see that Linda just posted a link to the weekly briefing. This incredible team that we're talking about, that we're a part of, that is so knowledgeable, and I agree with Elan. I mean, really not. I guess not tooting my own horn because I would not say I'm the best in the business. I just know about robots and stuff. But the team is the best in the business and extremely knowledgeable about this thing. Every single week, this team puts together a report, and it's really just a treasure trove of information for anyone interested in sort of early warnings about different substances. And there is triangulation across the reports, and there is sort of here's what we're seeing about it in web monitoring, here's what we're seeing about it from emergency reports, here's what we're seeing about it from toxicology. And so I would heavily encourage, completely aside from selfish reasons, heavily encourage anyone interested in this to subscribe to that report.
Is there time for questions? I don't know how the
Yeah, they
panel's
could put them in the chat.
okay.
They've
Yeah.
been they've
If
been
anybody,
putting them in the chat.
that's right. I don't know if there was a special time allocated also for questions, but
Can you tell us what is one of the most important pieces of your work that you couldn't have thought about 10 years ago, that you want everybody to know? You told us how we can get on and what we should do. And you know, people here may not use it, but what is the most important thing that you think they should have?
in their own work.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, I would have to agree with Daniel on this. Like, if there's any potential value in you being able to access this kind of data source, it is invaluable. There is no replacement for it. There's nothing
Hmm.
like it. There's just nothing that's ever going to be as early and as rich. It's a very, very rich data. So for me, that's certainly been the insight, as far as my experience with this group and with this kind of data, is that there is there's gold there's gold in these hills, right? There's valuable data to be gained here, and it's really quite accessible. You don't have to be a trained web scraper to do a Google search, as Daniel just showed you. And so, to me, that's yeah. The insight is just that there is this kind of value from
Hmm.
data source that wasn't designed for it, right? That's not why people are having these conversations. But there it is. And if you can access it, you can use it. So that if people have questions about, how, Daniel quickly went through just a little bit of the process of how somebody can just jump in and do it. But again, I would just strongly encourage people to recognize that there is a lot of utility that may be relevant to your work. If you can't think of how it's relevant to your work, hit me up. I might have some ideas. It
Put
might
your
not be immediately
emails.
obvious. Sorry?
Can you put your emails
Of course.
in the chat? Because I know people will want to get in touch with both of you. Because I think you're saying
And
if you're writing a grant and you're writing something in intro section, put a little blurb in there about what you've read, what you've heard from Reddit, because it will give another perspective about the people with lived experience.
Yep.
and I'm 100% backing up Elan on this. I mean, I think one way to think about the Reddit data and how useful it is and how rich it is imagine you hear about the name of some new substance that's out there, and you can snap your fingers and do sort of get data from 100 interviews with folks with lived experience with this. That's basically what the Reddit data is. It's extremely rich. People are extremely detailed in their accounting of things on Reddit, and it's really incredible.
Yeah, and I should mention, I don't really know who's represented in this meeting and who may see this, but what we're doing is quite narrow in a certain sense that we're trying to detect and understand the trends of various substances. So we're looking for obscure things. We are looking for the conversations around 7-OH. But if whatever your substance of interest is, or community of interest, there's very likely to be very rich information. People share all kinds of other things. What are the struggles people have when dealing with a particular kind of substance? They're not necessarily going to share that even with their medical professionals. And even if they do, you're not going to hear about it. So this gives you access. People kind of bare their souls to some extent, under a pseudonym, but they are often sharing their as I said, lived experiences with substances. Sometimes, they are not, it could just be, I got a headache, but there are people who, have gone into actually share their overdose experiences, and things that, again, you're not going to really have access to that kind of information. So I just think that this community, there's probably more out there, that could really be of value in understanding what is really happening, to real people who are using these kinds of substances. I would again just encourage people to kind of think broadly. It's not you. You may be like, I don't try to detect novel substances, and I'm not saying everybody here is in that game. That's how we spend our time. But however you're spending your time in this community, there might be some valuable resources. So again, please hit me up. We're happy to share not just the sort of the layperson's. Here's how you do it just on Google. But we could tell you how we build out our architecture to store data over a certain amount of time, and this doesn't require a PhD in computer science. So there is, if there's an application and you're intimidated by it, and like, how would I gather that data? How would I find it if I can't go? Again, we're happy to share.
Thank you so much. Daniel, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, we've got one other question in the chat that I wanted to respond to. Someone asked, what other sources of data have you ruled out? Many sources of data are hard to scrape at scale, but if you're just looking at a Google search, there's many sources of data that are useful. The dark web is a little bit harder to get access to for obvious reasons, but I would say 4 sources of data that I often find extremely useful on substances from lived experience reports. Reddit, obviously, erowid.org, EROWID, bluelight.org, and that's spelled bluelight.org. And then Wikipedia often has surprisingly up-to-date entries on substances, with sort of medical information and links to, this paper that existed about a similar substance 40 years ago and things like that. And so the dark web is the main one I've ruled out, but as far as ones that I would look at, and if you're doing a Google search, put site, whatever site, it would be those 4: Reddit, Erowid, Blue Light, and Wikipedia.
Okay. I want to say thank you to both Elan and Dan, and also thank you to Herb for